Well, I'm excited about what God is going to say to you and to each of us through this series. So as we're getting started, if you have a Facebook-enabled device, would you share the live stream that's going on right now and maybe tag somebody else in it and just let them know they need to be here. If you're watching online, come in, see what's going on here at the building because this is going to be a powerful series. And I know I say that each time, and I believe it more and more each time, but there's just something about this series that I feel is more needed in our world and in those around us today than perhaps ever before. You see, I remember one moment in my life where I don't think I've ever stared at a dashboard of a vehicle more intently than this. It was about 10 years ago, and my wife and I were still in our first year of marriage. And we were having a conversation that I never in my wildest dreams imagined we would be having. We talked about the reality that, we don't really believe in divorce, either of us, because biblically there are very, very few exceptions for why God allows divorce. So since we didn't believe in that, maybe given the circumstances of just how different we were, we would separate, stay married on paper, but just never see each other again. You laugh, but that was one of the most horrifying moments of my life. I never dreamed that I would get to that point, and especially within the first year of marriage. And so I knew that something had to change. I knew that something needed to go on in my heart and in hers. But I can't speak for her. She's downstairs with leading all the kids, and so maybe she can share her side of the things later. But for me, what I realized is that we had a piece of paper saying that we loved each other. But in reality, at least as far as I go, I was using her, or even just the idea of her, to love myself. It wasn't that I didn't love her. It's just that I loved myself a lot more. And she became a conduit for how I could love myself better. And so as we're in that conversation, I realized that isn't going to work. See, when we talk about love, there's one phrase that just kind of comes up. Love isn't a game. And yet, if you look at the way we play games nowadays, perhaps we should start treating love like one. There are over 2.5 billion human beings on the planet right now who identify in some way or another as gamers. So whether you're a casual, Candy Crush player on your phone, or whether you're all the way up to PC Master Race, 1 in 3 human beings understands the concept of playing video games in today's world. And it's gotten far bigger than we could have ever imagined. You see, we used to build these things called football stadiums, but now we build e-sports stadiums, where thousands upon thousands of people gather together to watch professional video game tournaments. And you think that sounds strange, except for you realize that the prize packages for the events are millions of dollars. Or if you need any more convincing, just know that about 2 weeks ago, Time Magazine released their top 100 most influential human beings on the planet. And among that list was a man by the name of Ninja. Well, his real name is Tyler Blevins, but he goes by Ninja. And here's what Ninja does to further humanity. He plays Fortnite, and he gets paid tens of millions of real-world dollars to play that video game. But the amount of views that he's getting, the way he's done product placements, he has become one of the top 100 most influential human beings on the planet. So what would look like if we took our video game culture and applied it to the rules of love? So I want to introduce you in this series to 2 different boxes. We have the love box and the Xbox. Now we understand with the Xbox that we must feed this thing, right? Not only do you spend hundreds of dollars buying the console, but after you plug it in, then you have to feed it subscriptions because they don't work without subscriptions. And then you have to feed it games. And you know, it's not just about the monetary cost of the games. It's about the energy and the time investment that we have to give. You know, an average game, it can take tens of hours, dozens of hours to level up your character. And if you really want to get serious about that game, you might have to spend hundreds of hours chasing that precious platinum trophy. Think about that. But it goes farther. If you want to play the game right, you need bedazzled accessories. You need batteries. You need things coming out of these controllers in every direction. You need headsets. And if you really want to get fancy, you need your controller to match your console. And then when that one wears out, you buy a different color. And then you put skins on it. And then. So we understand as a culture nowadays that if you want to play the Xbox, you've got to feed that thing and invest in it and give it your time and your energy and your money. Unfortunately, when it comes to the love box, we as humans tend to have an opposite understanding. There's a myth in our human lives that our relationships are filled with things that we get to enjoy. That we can pull from our relationship box or our love box everything we've ever hoped or dreamed to have. But the reality is, just like the Xbox before you buy the subscriptions and the games and the controllers, the love box is empty when it first starts. You see, love isn't in relationships. Love is in people. And people put love into relationships. Intimacy isn't automatically in a marriage. You have to infuse your marriage with intimacy and love. But we come to these things and we think, well, I'm going to get into my love box and I'm just going to pull out companionship. It's already there. I'm going to pull it out. I'm going to pull out time, and we're just going to set aside time together. And that's the way it's just going to work automatically. Or maybe, you know, just maybe we think, well, because we're together, there should just automatically be attraction, right? We shouldn't have to work for it. It should just be there. And so we think our love box is filled with attraction. Oh, and of course, romance. I had to go to a garage sale yesterday to get this bad boy. I'm just sad Fabio's not the one on the cover. In my mind, if you're going to have romance, Fabio should be involved in some way or another. But it keeps going, you know. We want shared hobbies. We want fun. We want, you know, those things where we can sit down together and have a romantic night watching old wrestling videos. Whatever it looks like. We just have this understanding that the love box should have everything in it that we need for our relationship to grow. But the reality is, our love box is empty. Our relationships start empty. And we have to infuse these things into the love box. So what if we treated our love the way that we treat video game culture? Now, some of you are here or you're watching and you're thinking, that's definitely me. My love box right now is empty. So let me just say this. For the next 8 weeks, 7 including this one, I want to ask you not to change your relationship status. So if you're a single person and you're scouring, you're trying to find, you're on the hunt or on the prowl, depending upon what, words you want to use there, I want to ask you for about the next 7 weeks, including this, or 8 weeks, including this one, to just stop. Just be single and enjoy it for a while. If you're in a marriage relationship and it's been rocky and you're in the process of putting through those papers that say you don't want to love each other anymore, stop for the next 8 weeks. If you are the person who's about to get married and the wedding is next month and that falls in these 8 weeks, cancel the deposits, cancel the band, stop it, just stop it. Okay, maybe don't go that far. Your family or your spouse-to-be might, come and put something up in, my head here, but let's just hold off for a second and let's learn what it means to love one another. Let's learn what it means to go into the love box and treat it with even more care than our video games. Because look, I grew up a video game player. I mean, the Nintendo has been a part of my life since I was this tall. But shouldn't we love each other more than we care about our high score on Fortnite or our character progression in Skyrim or whatever it looks like? Shouldn't we want to fight for love? So as we begin, we need to talk about the source of love. Because if love doesn't automatically come from our relationships, and this love box starts out empty, where does love actually come from? 1 John 4:8 on the screen says, "The one who does not know love does not know God, for God is love." Now, I know we're doing some introductory stuff here, and we'll get into Corinthians here in a minute. If you're following along in your impact guides and taking notes there, we're going to get to what is in that. But let's look at this real quick, because this perhaps leads us to one of the most profound things that we can understand. That love isn't automatically in the relationships. Where is love found? It's God. And you may be thinking, okay, it's church. I knew you were going to say that. But hear me out for a second. Because this verse doesn't say God has love. It says God is love. That means that all real love finds its source in God. Love isn't just some part of God. It's an irremovable aspect of his character. And when we act as loving people, we are not creating love out of nowhere. We're not pulling it out of some magic box. We are borrowing it from the character of God. And when we don't know love, we're not fully aware of the love that God has for us and that God has for those around us. And so, as we dig into this series, I want to start with that base understanding that love, in its ultimate form and through its alternate source, comes from God. And so, the more we become like God, the more we become like Jesus, the more we embody love. The more we become like Jesus, the more we embody love. That's an intentional word right there, embody. It means to put flesh on. It means to come alive, to represent that. When my wife and I were sitting in that car talking about separating and just letting a piece of paper be what unites us, the reality was we weren't embodying love for one another. We said the words, but there wasn't flesh on it. It wasn't living. It wasn't real. And it was something that we had to face, realize, and work through. But as I've said, that conversation was 10 years ago. And now, 10 years later, we have 2 kids. We've got a healthier marriage than we probably could have even imagined possible 10 years ago. But it took that putting on love that we're going to talk about. You see, as you know from this series, we're going to be walking through 1 Corinthians chapter 12 and 13. And maybe you hear 1 Corinthians 13, and if that makes sense, you go, oh, I love that chapter, because it's the love chapter, right? Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. And you hear these words, and they sound so poetic. It sounds so beautiful. You even hear TV shows use those words. Shows that are afraid of the Bible, that won't mention Jesus, will say love is patient, love is kind. But how many of you have ever looked at that and realized that those aren't just words? That is the embodiment of what we are supposed to be. Back when I was in college, I had a professor who, on every single biblical paper we did, would write 3 letters at the top. C-I-E. Didn't matter if your score was 100% or 0%. Every single paper, every single class, C-I-E. What does that stand for? Context is everything. So how many of you know that 1 Corinthians chapter 13 has something that came before it? 1 Corinthians, one hand went up. I've got a, and one person blew their mind. That was great. So 1 Corinthians chapter 13 is preceded by 1 Corinthians chapter 12. And 1 Corinthians chapter 12 is preceded by 1 Corinthians chapter 11. Man, we could keep doing that all the way back to Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created. But we are going to start in 1 Corinthians chapter 11. So if you have a Bible with you, take that out. If you don't have a Bible, you can grab one from the pews in front of you, and that is our gift to you. And in the impact guides that you were handed, you have a space to take notes. There's devotional material, and there's other things that you can look at throughout the week to help embody love. So 1 Corinthians chapter 11, starting in verse 23, says this: "For I received from the Lord what I also passed on to you. On the night when he," referring to Jesus, "was betrayed, the Lord Jesus took bread. And when he had given thanks, he broke it. And he said, 'This is my body, which is for you. Do this in remembrance of me.' In the same way, he also took the cup after supper and said, 'This cup is the new covenant in my blood. Do this as often as you drink it in remembrance of me.'" You see, context is everything. And it's no coincidence that last Sunday was Easter. And on Easter, we celebrate Jesus' death and resurrection, how he embodied love for us in every real way. But you see, when he says those words, "This is my body which is broken for you," he's saying there's something tangible to love. But he's also showing us that real love starts from him. Because he died for us, because he resurrected, because we have that Easter hope that he is not still hanging on a cross, that he is not in a tomb. Remember last week, it is empty. Our love box can become full. And the more we become like Jesus, the more he challenges us and transforms us. The more we start to embody love, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, self-control, the more we start to see that when Jesus goes into the love box, we have everything else that we can start drawing from. Suddenly, he teaches us what it means to be companions. As he shared that Last Supper with his disciples, even knowing one of them was going to betray him, he invested that time in them and put companionship in the box. He hung out with his disciples for 3 straight years when they smelled bad, when they had showered, when they were angry at each other, when they were yelling at him, because that happened. There was times where they just sat together and talked. And the book of Mark, it says they were friends. I don't know how Jesus put romance into the equation there, but he's the author of romance. He allows us to have Fabio books, which is, a thing. It's great. So the more that we become like Jesus, the more we see what true love looks like. In fact, throughout Scripture, Jesus is that example. It says we are able to love because he first loved us. And in one of those scary verses, I've mentioned it before, but in Ephesians it says, husbands, love your wives the same way Christ loved the church. Jesus is that example for us. Part of Renee and I's struggles, I think, early on is that we didn't really have great examples. We had wonderful parents, don't get me wrong, but both of us were only children, and both of us came from a broken home where our father wasn't a part of things. So we didn't have those models of what it looked like when you get in an argument to come back together and find healing and hope. We didn't have those models of what it looks like, when one person is kind of being what my mom would call a stinker. One person's being a stinker, how to come back and truly love one another. You see, it wasn't until we really invested our lives into this community called the church that we learned what love could truly look like. Early on in our marriage, Dave and Anna Dooley, the pastor that I was serving under, he would connect with us and he'd pull me aside at times and say, hey, how are you loving your wife? How are you treating your wife? How are you investing in your wife? And he would help me see what that looked like. When we moved to Columbus and I was the discipleship pastor over our campuses there, we had one of our small group leaders come up to me and say, Lee, I know you're in charge of this thing, but you need a group too, and I want you to come be a part of our young couples group. I was like, okay. And so we sat in that group together and we learned from others who had been married longer than us what it looks like to have a healthy and successful marriage. We saw people embody the love of Jesus for our lives. And it helped us understand how we could love others. You see, if you look in your impact guide today, you'll notice that the devotional material and everything, it's based around 1 Corinthians chapter 12. My senior pastor that I served under in Oklahoma used to do this all the time. He'd say, take your sermon notes out and throw them away because God changed the sermon on me this week. Well, this is the first time it's happened for me, but it's that context to understand that 1 Corinthians chapter 12 first has to understand God's love for us in 1 Corinthians chapter 11. But in 1 Corinthians chapter 11, the very reason why we have the love chapter is Paul is talking to the church and he says, guys, I've actually heard that there's division among you. There's fighting among you. That you're not coming together in the right ways and honoring God through the communion. And so he gives them a reminder of what it looks like for love to have flesh on. He gives them a reminder of Jesus' love. And then he talks about throughout 1 Corinthians 12, as we'll talk about next week, what it looks like to serve one another as the church. And then love is patient, love is kind. And so for the next 7 weeks, we're going to dig into those words. 6 of those weeks are going to be committed to 1 Corinthians chapter 13. But before we could get there, we have to understand that we need to play better games with love. I'm not saying play games the same way we play with the Xbox. Let's leave that in our childhood. But we need to invest time, resources, energy into our relationships if we expect them to grow. We had that moment where my wife and I talked about the reality of divorce. And it shouldn't have surprised us because the reality was in our pre-marriage counseling, the pastor who we turned to say, hey, will you marry us? He said this, he said, Lee, I will not marry you and Renee unless you seek professional counseling first. And I was like, oh, you do that for everybody. That's a great idea, Steve. I love it. He goes, no, Lee, listen to me. I have never in my ministry met a couple that was more opposite than you two are. And there was that moment where on the one side I was like, are we making a horrendous mistake? And on the other side I was like, challenge accepted. you know what? We are going to be that couple who overcomes all the odds. But we started out in the negative. We started out behind the baseline. We started out below zero. And when we say, or when he said, we are more opposite than anybody he's ever met, he means it. I'm an extrovert. My wife is an introvert. We had a conversation early on in our marriage where she said, hey, I know you like hanging out with people and stuff like that. How often would you like to hang out with people together? And I said, I don't know, 3, 4 times a week. And her face just, you know, like when somebody loses all the blood and it just goes white? She was like, I was thinking once a month would be my tops. Like, okay, we've got some ways to come together. What I had to learn was how to embody love and love my wife the way that Christ loved the church. And it was through the church that I learned how to do that. And so I know I'm setting up a lot for this series, but I want to remind you, if you're not in a life group, get in a life group. That's one way that you can start to see how other people embody Jesus. But let me just say this to you. If you are here and you're a married couple and you've been married for longer than 10 minutes, you have every right to mentor someone who's been married for less than 10 minutes. If you've been married for longer than 10 years, some of the people here are like, wow, you're a unicorn. That still exists. Amazing. You have every right, and you should be mentoring someone, some couple or couples who haven't been married that long. And if you're in here today and you're celebrating your 100th wedding anniversary, wow, congratulations. But that means you have full right to help mentor every generation before you. And not just the right, but the responsibility. Because the church is God's plan A for how the world gets changed. And relationships aren't going to fix themselves. It doesn't matter how opposite or not opposite you are. We don't get trained how to make them work anymore. So church, we need each other. We need to invest in each other and show what love looks like with flesh on. The more we become like Jesus, the more we embody love. As Brendan mentioned, I want to take just a moment to give a pre-final update for our Uncharted journey. If you've been with us before, you know that we are a 131-year-old church who's entering into a new chapter. And as a part of that, we are asking every person to come together and to invest in the church, not just financially, but also, as 1 Corinthians 12 says, in ways that we serve one another, in ways that we mentor one another. And so on Commitment Sunday, just a couple weeks ago, we asked everyone to fill out one of the little cards that you see in front of you in the pews. We asked everybody to commit and go all in to this Uncharted journey. You see, Uncharted represents our all-in commitment to see Jesus change the story for our city around us and help us relearn love as a city together. And so I just want to say 2 things. First of all, next Sunday, we're going to do our first fruits or first gift offering. And so if you've already made that commitment and you're all in for the next 2 years as we transform this church, then that's the Sunday to start bringing. Preferred gift is online, but you're also welcome to bring them to the giving boxes that are here. You can mail it to the church, but that's where you start. And if you have made a one-time commitment to liquidate a resource of some kind, and you're asking, okay, when are we actually supposed to do that? Start next week, as it's wise and as you're able, and start bringing in that first fruits commitment. I'm trying to use the word communion. Sorry, first fruits commitment. But maybe you're in here and you made a commitment and you still feel God is leaning into you. If so, you can take one of those cards this week and fill out another one and drop it in as we respond. And if you're here and you haven't made that commitment yet, I want to ask you prayerfully to take that next step. Because the reality is the church is God's plan A, and there is no plan B for showing the world what it means to love. for showing the world what it means to interact with one another. And so next week, we're going to bring those commitments, those final commitments. We're also going to announce the commitment numbers so far. Now, we know from campaign history of ones done here and ones done across churches in the past, that number that we'll announce is only going to grow over the course of that next 2 years as God leans into people more, or as new people begin coming, or as unexpected blessings happen. But we're going to announce the number that we have so far and what that means for what we can do as a church. Because we are here to have a transformational impact in our city, one person at a time. And I don't know about you, but I want to be a part of saving marriages, saving families, helping save lives and eternities as people realize that Jesus truly is the only source of love and hope that we can find. So what's your next step? Well, if you're already done, you feel like you've got that commitment in place, I want to remind you about that one person that you're praying for. And you'll see cards on your seat that say, "Come with me." Invite that person to church with you next week. Or invite somebody else that you know. The only way that people are going to hear about the gospel is through you inviting them or sharing it with them personally. So bring that. But prepare your hearts as we step into that last phase of the uncharted piece for our next 2 years. So as we transition in this moment of worship, I want to invite you to pray through what Jesus is speaking to you. Maybe you're that person who came in here and you said, "My love box is completely empty. It's running on fumes, and if something doesn't change, something's going to have to change." I want to encourage you to pray that God would begin to fill that love box, to give you that patience, to help you stop keeping record of wrongs. If you're that couple who, man, we're a young couple, we don't know what we're doing, but I see this other couple, they've been married 20 years and they've figured something out. Would you not wait for them? Go to them and say, "Hey, can we just have dinner once a month?" Or if you just feel like you need to have a moment with Jesus right here at the altars, or you want to take communion, we have that available each week so that you can do self-guided communion. Just tear off a piece of bread, dip it in, and then take that. But as you do, remember, this is his body that was broken for you. This is his blood that forms a new covenant so that we can relearn love all over again. Would you pray with me? Heavenly Father, God, help us to reset our priorities and our understanding. Jesus, we know that you are the source of all love. That apart from you, there's not another source, there's not another place that love flows. So help us to draw closer to you. And as we do, help us to embody love. Help us not just to say love is patient, but to learn what it means to be patient with each other. Help us not just to say love keeps no record of wrongs. Help us to burn the lists, the ways that we're writing down how the other people around us have hurt us, or the ways they frustrate us. God, as we know that love rejoices with the truth, help us to understand what it means that your love can fill us, and that we can love because you first loved us. Jesus, let this be a holy moment. Let us make an altar and come forward, or right where we are, come to the communion stations, or just in our own hearts realize that we truly can change the way we love others. And as we do, that can change the world around us. Change that atmosphere in our hearts, Jesus. It's in your holy name we pray. Amen.
Amen.